Thank you, Zoom. So hello all. Today again we have a special guest. Laila is a member of our community, so I'm sure that most of you already know her. And in general, I think that she doesn't need much introduction. But uh, let me give a brief introduction. So I'm super happy that she agreed to give this talk, because when I was at NDC London, then I was really impressed and enjoyed that talk. It's like from the generalist perspective, but I really like how both meta and practical it is. And Laila is a software engineer. She works at Particular, and she's main interest, at least in terms of work, is the messaging, ensuring that our system are observable, that we know what we are doing, we see where it's failing, how to fix it, etc. And besides that, and that was surprising for me, she loves knitting. So uh, maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A part. And this time, I won't be interrupting during the talk, but I will be observing the chat. So if you see anything that came to your mind, and if you would like to ask the question, then please send them as they go. And then we will have the Q&A part in the end, and I will be and ensure that we will have the chance to discuss all the questions. So I think that's all from my side. So I will give now Laila the chance to tell something more interesting than I did.
Thank you for the kind words, Oscar. It's really nice to be here and to be able to present the session to you. I've only had the chance to, well, actually, I was going to say I only had the chance to present this once, but that's not true. I actually presented it another time at NDC Sydney as well. But hey, I can refresh it back. So actually, the way that I always start the session is by a point of reflection of this year, because when I created this presentation, it was January, and one of the things that I was really thinking about is, oh my God, it's 2024, and that means that I will be celebrating a milestone birthday this year, and I'm basically approaching the age where people just put a single sparkler on your cake because, you know, one per year, that is way too cumbersome at this point. And it's actually becoming a bit of a fire hazard. So I find that that's a very good reason to have a first midlife crisis. And, you know, apart from all of the expensive bags and shoes that is going to entail by definition, it's also really been a time of reflection, of sort of thinking back about my professional career and, you know, all of the things that went well, all of my achievements, but also my failures, because there's been quite a few of those. But more importantly, what I have learned from all of those experiences throughout the year. And that is exactly what I want to share with you today, is those deeper insights that I've gained over my entire career, and that I really believe that may be better at my job. Now, to do that, I have to take you all the way back to one of the first projects I ever worked on. And at that point, we were basically, let me see if my clicker wants to cooperate. Come on, clicker. Come on, clicker. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, that works. So we were basically building a proof of concept for a prospect customer. We didn't even sign them yet, right? The goal was to get them signed. So we quickly cobbled together something that could showcase a couple of working use cases that they were looking to solve. And we took a lot of shortcuts doing this because we were just trying to get them signed, right? So yeah, we didn't really think through our choices, and we were just trying to get something clickable, something working that we could demo. And I remember joining that demo meeting with the prospect, our development team, and then also a sales representative and the project manager. And it was great. The demo gods were with us that day. Everything went smoothly. And the prospect was like, oh my God, this looks, this looks amazing. This is exactly what we need. When can I start using this? Now, I remember locking eyes with the sales representative in that moment before he turned around to the prospect and said, well, we just need to fix a couple of things, but give us a month and you should be able to use this in production. Yeah, that was an interesting moment because the prospect was super happy, but me, I had lightning bolts shooting from my eyes, like in anger and frustration of what are you saying? And I guess that you can probably all guess what happened, but we did end up going to production and with all of the consequences that that brought, because we were basically building feature upon feature on a foundation that was never meant to support a production environment at that point. It was never meant to support the scale at which it was being used. Now, the biggest challenge that we ran into is that we couldn't get additional budget, right? Because in the customer's eyes, everything looked great and everything was working, right? They could click through everything, the user interface looked great. And that's, of course, only true until it didn't, and until it started failing, until the system started to become less stable, until it became harder to deliver new features. And at the time, to be honest, I had no idea how to navigate this. So this project ended up sort of like going through a lot of friction and slowly dying out. So it failed. And I remember asking myself, like, how did I get here? And more importantly, how do I ensure that this never ever happens again, right? Thinking through everything what happened at the time, I really thought that the reason that this failed is because we made poor technical choices. We didn't think about our architecture up front. We didn't really spend any time designing this, thinking about how it was going to be used in production, right? We took a lot of shortcuts just to get something to a customer quickly. So what did I do? Well, I continued educating myself in, all of the state-of-the-art technology, or what was state-of-the-art at the time. And I basically just immersed myself in everything from language features to frameworks, patterns, practices, unit testing, and I don't know what all techniques. And I really believed that if I would know and understand all of these things deeply, that I would be equipped to make better choices in the future. And it was hard to keep up because every time I learned one thing, I realized that there was something else I needed to learn. But hey, that's our industry, right? And life does go on. So at some point, the next project came along. And that was really exciting. Basically, the developer's dream, right? A greenfield project, a sizable project as well. So that was really interesting. We were really excited. And yeah, you'd wonder, what did we do? Well, I guess the only thing we could do at the time, we basically treated it like a kid walking into a candy store with a Platinum American Express card. We used all the latest and greatest technology, or what was latest and greatest at the time. We had multiple data stores, we had sophisticated security, we paid attention to how we designed our domain, we thought about scaling because this time it was going to scale, yes or yes. And we paid attention to unit testing and clean code practices and performance testing, you name it. And you'd ask yourself, okay, so did that make it successful? And the answer is no, because what happened is we ran out of budget. We spent so much time gold plating and perfecting things and thinking over our decisions over and over and over again and how we're going to design this and do that, that we never even got to deliver a first functioning version to our users before they pulled the plug on us. And even though the code was incredibly sophisticated, it still failed. Now, at that point, I really struggled. I was like, how did this happen again? Right? I realized that even though I had gone through all of that effort of educating myself and applying all of these best practices and avoiding all of these anti-patterns, I only came to the conclusion that it still failed because I wasn't considering all the variables at play. I was like, come on, how did I get here again? Now, of course, this happened again in varying degrees of drama, right? Luckily, not all of these projects were so bad. Throughout my career, I've been really lucky to be part of many, many great projects that I've really been that I'm really proud of still to this day to have been a part of. But thinking back, each and every one of those projects had different pain points and different sort of kinds of friction. And over the years, that basically, that thought process of never do this again and never do that again, that sort of swung a couple of backs, back and forth, like the balls in a cradle. And what happened is that I learned, and then I took those learnings to the next project, to the next customers. And over time, one thing stood out to me. And that was that in some things that didn't work well in one context, that I thought, oh my God, these are like anti-patterns and I should avoid forever, those ended up working actually quite well in different contexts. So sometimes it was just not the right choice in that context. And over time, that basically that back and forth that was so intense in the beginning, that started to sort of stabilize a little bit more in the middle. And with that came sort of a realization that there is no such thing as the right architecture, or no right set of frameworks to use, no perfect programming language, right? No absolute perfect project methodology that is going to lead to the success of your project. And success was also not really dependent on the team structure or composition alone. It wasn't really linked to the size of the organization either. It was actually something deeper, and something that in most of the organizations that I worked in, nobody was really paying attention to. It was about the decisions that we made and how we made those decisions, how we evaluated them. That ended up being the key for me, because the more attention and intention that we were basically spending on our decision making, the better the outcomes usually were. Now, all of us make decisions on a daily, weekly basis in our work. It doesn't really matter if you're early in your career or if you're tech lead deciding about large-scale system architectures, because we make decisions that impact our work, our projects, our systems, and our users, although, of course, with varying degrees of impact. But with that in the back of your mind, I'd like you to take a moment and ask yourself, over the last few weeks, as you were at work, right? What decisions did you make? And how impactful were those decisions? What were the negative effects of those decisions? Because there always are a few. Was it did you choose a solution that would work in the long term, or was it more of a quick fix type of situation? And what was the problem that you were solving? Did you understand that problem well enough? Was it a problem that you needed to fix right now, or did you consider maybe postponing that to a later point in time? And which solutions were considered? Which options did you think about? Did you even consider multiple options? Also, what assumptions did you make about the context that you are in your project, with your customers, with your stakeholders? How did you ensure that you weren't overly biased towards your preferred solution? How can you explain, in which ways can you explain that your solution was the exact right way to basically move forward within your context? And did you take some time to validate your thought process with others? Or in short, how are you debugging your thoughts? Now, if this is how you feel right now, then that's exactly one of the things that I would like to address with this session. Because if you would have bombarded me with all of these questions a couple of years ago, I would probably have felt a little bit of the same. But over the last years, I've gained a lot of clarity by both studying and practicing on a daily basis, even critical thinking, basically picking apart my own thoughts. And that is exactly what I want to share here with you today, how we can all learn to debug our thinking. Now, I didn't choose this title just because it's a nice play of words, but because I realized in learning about critical thinking and applying it, that it actually aligns very, very well with how we debug our systems. Because when we run into an issue in a production environment, what we will usually do is we will take some time to understand the problem that's going on. And I will start to dig a little bit into the details, maybe investigating some observability signals like traces or logs or whatever it is to get an understanding of where the friction is. Then maybe we'll start debugging some of those components. and carefully inspecting the call stack to understand, okay, in which order were these operations executed and so forth. We start placing breakpoints everywhere, right? To understand how did we get here? What data was passed on? And we'll start inspecting variables to validate whether they do actually have those values that we expect them to carry, right? And what I truly believe is that our thought process could benefit from exactly those same activities. And you might ask yourself, well, okay, how? I mean, there is no such thing as a mental debugger, right? But we can basically build one based on multiple techniques and practices. We can start to build our own mental debugger. But before we do that, we also need to understand the traps that we tend to fall into. And the most common one is our beloved solution mode. Now, usually what happens is that someone will walk up to your desk and say, hello, I need you to solve this problem that I have. And what do? Well, we immediately jump into solution mode. And I think that this is a normal reaction because at the end of the day, we are hired to solve those types of problems, right? And to make things worse, when they're asking us to solve a problem, well, they want it done by yesterday. They don't want to wait for a long time because they're basically experiencing that friction now. So it's not only that we are biased towards action, no, we are incentivized to basically immediately jump in and start solving that problem. But the biggest risk that we face is that we could be solving things the wrong way, or worse, solving the wrong problem to begin with. And that's why it's so important to take a moment and slow down. Gives me a breather as well. Take a moment, think about the problem that we are faced with. Because one of the things that I've come to realize as I started to intentionally listen to these problems that are presented to us is that we are rarely presented with problems. Instead, what people come to us with are observations, points of friction that they're experiencing, maybe symptoms of a deeper issue. But most commonly, what people bring to us are solutions. Oh, I need a big red button over there, or I need an additional field on this screen, or can you get me a report of that data? So it's really important to ask yourself, is this actually a problem or is it something else? And if so, what is the underlying issue that they are trying to solve? And there's one magical question that answers it. Why? ¿Por qué? علاش? لماذا? Tune. I can tell you this in many different languages, but that doesn't really matter. What's important is that you ask this question and that you ask it repeatedly. And what I'm referring to, points to who guesses, is the 5 whys technique, which was introduced by Toyota. It's basically a simple root cause analysis technique that can help us get to the underlying problem that people are trying to solve, right? Just by asking why or why not a couple of times, we can basically get to that underlying problem that they're trying to solve. Now, what we want to do is get an idea, because I know that there are plenty of other root cause analysis techniques out there, but we don't want to go full analysis mode just yet. That's why I find that this technique works really well, because our goal at this point is only to get an initial framing of the problem. So this question should be sufficient together with one more essential tool. And that's a pencil, or okay, a keyboard for us, I guess. Usually we'll just grab a keyboard. But what's really important is that we write this down, right? Forcing ourselves to write down the problem will also help us slow down. Even if it's just 5 minutes, that is more than enough. But what you will realize as you start practicing this is that you usually need more time. Because writing is nature's way of letting you know how sloppy your thinking is. Because the thing is that when you write things down, you need to start converting all of those chaotic streams of thought that are going on in your brain to something that is clear, specific, and concise, something that anyone would be able to understand, which means that you need to understand things well enough. And by going through this exercise, my experience is that you get unprecedented clarity by just writing things down. But it also gives you a bunch of additional advantages, because now you have something written down that you can share with your peers. You have something to discuss, you have something to validate with your peers in terms of your team or even outside. You can also share it with stakeholders. That helps create alignment and avoid misunderstandings, right? Is this the problem that you want me to solve? Are you sure? That's a really important question to ask. So with that in mind, I'll present you a couple of key points to remember. Like, first of all, like I said, write it down. Like, just use simple terms that anyone can understand. A single paragraph is enough. Doesn't have to be a novel, right? And it's important not to include any solutions. It's important that we just focus on the problem. And by not providing any solution proposals at all, it also helps us to keep an open mind and also to avoid coming up with problem statements for solutions that we fell in love with. And we'll see a little bit more about that later. You also don't need any technical terms in order to describe a problem. And usually, if you do find yourself in the need to use technical terms, you are probably still thinking in solution mode or in terms of friction. So it's important to dig a little bit deeper and try to understand what the underlying business problem is that you're trying to solve. And then also you want to make it specific and measurable in the sense that if we have a problem statement, we need to be able to understand what are the things that need to be true in order for this problem to be solved, right? And when we have all of this and we have that problem statement, we should still take a moment and ask ourselves, is this the right problem to solve? Now, I'm going to explain why that's so important by showing you a well-known use case in complex problem solving. And that is the elevator problem. So imagine that you own an office building, right? And you are getting complaints about the elevator. It is too slow. It is stopping everywhere. There's a queue every time, and I'm getting late to my meetings. I don't know why this is taking so long. So what happens is that the problem is framed as the elevator is too slow. And generally that looks good, right? I mean, it's simple, anyone can understand it. It's clear, it's concise, it's measurable. But there's one big problem with how this problem is currently framed, because it's basically narrowing down and almost self-imposing the applicable solution space. Because the elevator is slow, so we need to make it faster, right? And it's important to consider this because when the group that was working this problem was presented with this, they came up with solutions like, well, we need to improve the algorithm of the elevator. Or no, I think we need to upgrade the motor. And then there was someone else who's saying, no, this elevator has been around for 20 years. We should replace the elevator altogether, which is the equivalent of a system rewrite, right? Now, in this example, what happened is that the problem was reframed to the wait time is annoying. And the effects of this were really interesting because the same group of people came up with wildly different solutions. And actually, the solution that they ended up implementing was to install mirrors in the elevators. Because now everyone riding the elevator was basically offered something incredibly fascinating to look at themselves. And you could argue that the speed of the elevator hasn't really changed, but because the users stopped complaining about the speed of the elevator, you could also argue that it's a sufficiently good solution to the problem, right? And cheap as well. And what's basically done here is what is called reframing. And we need to do a lot more of that, starting with our own role in the industry. Now, for years and years and years, when someone would ask me, hey, Laïla, what is it that you do? Then I would say, oh, I write code. I build complex systems, distributed systems. Now, I'm almost 2 decades into my career, and I think it's the worst possible way that anyone could think about our role. Not only because of how others view us, but how we view ourselves, right? It's putting us in the completely wrong frame of mind. Our goal is not to write code. It is not even to build complex systems. Our goal is to solve business problems. And yes, in most cases, that does involve the means of technology in one way or another. But if we are faced with a problem that doesn't require any technical solution, any code for it to be solved, then why would we try to find the technical solution anyway. It's actually our responsibility, in my opinion, as technical experts, to know and point out when a technical solution is not needed, no matter how much fun it would be to build, right? And I truly believe that if we change our perspective to we're here to solve problems with the means of technology when applicable, then we can also shift away from thinking in terms of code alone. And that will also help us reframe the problems that we are faced with. So whenever you create this initial problem statement, you have to also review it critically and ask yourself, is this statement even true? Like, is the elevator actually slow? How fast are elevators, generally speaking, for this type of building? Also ask yourself, like, who is affected by this, right? Because if you don't understand who has the problem, how can you ensure that you're solving it at all? You have to understand who your stakeholders are. Also ask yourself, is there a solution bias in this problem statement? Right? This is not the same as a solution proposal, which I discussed before, but more of a solution bias. Like in the example of the elevator, there's a bias to make it faster because we're saying that it's slow, right? And the thing is that this is something that happens a lot because our brain will basically cause us to frame problems in ways that align with our preferred solution. So it's important to take some time to, consciously burst that bubble and try to understand how we may be biasing things. Also ask yourself, like, what happened before this problem occurred, right? Like, was there maybe maintenance done on the elevator? Or maybe a new company moved into the office and we're actually sort of over capacity in the building, and that's why we're seeing such queuing at the elevator. Finally, also ask yourself, are there any hidden influences? Like, could it, for example, be that all of these complaints about the elevator are actually happening as a strategy to force the building manager to lower the rent? Asking all of these questions can basically help us rethink the problem to see if we can reframe it another way and maybe find a better problem to solve. Now, as you could see with this sort of elevator use case, right, problem reframing can drastically impact how we end up solving problems, the applicable solution space, right, that I like to call for a problem. Because we basically went from replacing the elevator to installing mirrors with nothing else than just a different perspective. And that really shows the importance of looking at things upside down and inside out, even before we start looking into solutions. And that's why I really like to stress that it's really important to remember that an ideal solution to the wrong problem is still way worse than an imperfect solution to the right problem, right? Now, although I'm mentioning reframing now, you have to think of it more as a sort of continuous activity from the moment that you have that initial problem framing, but even as you go through analysis, looking at multiple options that you could use to basically solve that problem, you have to engage in that exercise multiple times. Because as we start to analyze the problem more deeply, we will also have a better understanding of what that problem is. We have a good term for this in Dutch. It's like voortschrijdend inzicht. The best way I can explain it, I can translate it to English, is progressive insights, I guess. So our understanding of that problem is evolving as we dig deeper. And every time that changes, we also need to sort of try to reframe that problem as well. Okay, so at this point, we've slowed down. We've thought about this problem without immediately jumping in, right? We've stopped ourselves from jumping into solution mode. But at some point, we still need to come up with a solution, right? But we're going to do that by considering multiple solutions. But even then, we run into a bunch of challenges again that can lead us down the wrong path and maybe even choose a suboptimal solution. Now, one of the most common pitfalls is still speed. just freaking do it already. Like, I don't want to be working on this anyway. I have this other really interesting project, and you came to bother me with this problem now. And that can cause us to move way too quickly again. That tends to go hand in hand with our bias to what we already know and trust and use, right? We're just going to use SQL Server. It's proven technology. We've used it for years. We have the infrastructure running. Our people know this technology. They know how to manage it. Those are all really good points, right? But if all you're using it for is to store some JSON, then it's still a very poor choice. But equally often, we will choose the wrong tool because we're just incredibly excited about technology. I mean, wouldn't it be cool? Everyone and their mother is using it. It's trending on YouTube or whatever. Now, one of the things that I like most about this industry and our job is that, you know, companies and people keep coming up with new frameworks and new technologies. I think that's one of the things that keeps me in this industry. But from that excitement to basically introducing it into a project that may even already be running in production, there's a lot to consider. Like, do you even have the knowledge in-house, for example? Because too often knowledge building is kept out of the equation. We just take it for granted. I mean, of course, we'll just learn. That is part of being in this industry, right? But I have seen projects where there's a consultancy team walking in and then building this incredibly sophisticated and great architecture to then leave it to a team that has not been trained and has not been enabled to then go and support and continue evolving that. And they ended up throwing it away. So even that is a very, very important thing to consider as well. But the opposite also happens, where basically teams will go in and build solutions to problems that were already solved over and over and over again. Because how hard can it be? But then they face massive work that is completely derailing them from the business problems that they should be solving, slowing down their progress. And that's why it's really important to look beyond what feels obvious, what feels natural, or even what sounds cool, right? And to get to the right solution, one of the things that we need to do is think outside the box. Now, I used to really hate this statement because I'm like, okay, think outside the box. Awesome. How do I think outside the box? Can you maybe give me a couple of pointers here? Like, how do you think outside the box? How do you even know where the boundaries of your box are, right? But one of the things that I've come to realize is that every human being has at some point in their life been able to think outside the box. Because the best example that I can think of is children. And the best way to prove it is with a real life story, right? Now, I have a daughter, she's called Nora, and she's currently 6.5. But I remember it was a couple of years ago, I think 2.5 years ago or so. She was 4, I guess, at the time, and she had a couple of friends over, and I made them charcuterie sandwiches for lunch. And one of her friends was looking in the sandwich and was saying, "What is this meat? This looks different." And this whole conversation on meat just starts. And they start to share what type of meat they eat. So this one says, "Oh, I eat chicken meat. Oh, I eat cow meat. Oh, this one says, I eat pork meat." And the other one says, "I eat horse meat." That may sound weird to some people, but that's something that people eat in Belgium sometimes. But then at some point, one of them looks up and says, "So what about people meat? I mean, that's also meat, right?" I just sort of stood there like I had this Stack Overflow exception going on in my brain, listening to what she was saying. And I was so shocked. So it took me a moment to recover from that sense of shock and explain, no. That is not something that we do. That is not a moral or even a legal thing to do. So I tried to explain it as good as I could to a 4-year-old that was not an option. But if you take a step back from that statement, from that situation altogether, that is what out of the box thinking is. It's about considering options that may feel counterintuitive, that maybe you've been told not to consider, that may shock others, and then genuinely asking yourself, is this a valid option? And the thing is that as kids, we naturally did this because there was no box limiting our thinking. But as we grow up, that box is created because we're taught about laws of nature and we're taught about society's rules, right? And we're also educated on how to do certain things, how to not do them, best practices, anti-patterns, and such things. And with all of those learnings, that box is basically created. Now, I want to be overly explicit in case it is not clear. I am not inciting anyone to propose or do any immoral or illegal things, okay? The goal of using this sort of silly example that happened between a couple of kids was to basically provoke that feeling of discomfort, of shock, of judgment, and of resistance that I felt at the time and that probably all of us felt. Because you will recognize that feeling in professional settings when people are bringing up options that are outside of your box, because not all boxes are created equally. And that can sometimes feel deeply uncomfortable. But whenever that happens, you should also be asking yourself, could it be that this person is thinking outside of my box, right? Now, if we're using academic terms, what I'm really talking about is convergent and divergent thinking, right? Where convergent thinking in this analogy is thinking inside the box, and divergent thinking is a lot more creative and exploratory and is happening outside the box. The idea is that we want to do a little bit of both, but that means that we need to sort of relearn this skill that we lost over the year. And you might wonder, how do you force yourself then out of the box? And the thing is that it starts with safety. Because in order to think outside the box, to basically go where you haven't gone before, to come up with things that are maybe non-obvious, you need to feel safe. Because you will have to propose things that maybe don't make sense to everyone. You may be breaking some rules here and there. And you're gonna bring options that other people won't like. And that's why safety is so important, because you need to know, like in your gut, that whatever you come up with is not going to make anyone think that you're stupid. It's not going to make anyone angry. It's not going to cause people to stop listening to you or negatively affect your career or your reputation, right? And the reality is that that still requires a culture and a value shift in many organizations. And I truly feel that we all have a responsibility to create that safety. Every one of us, right? Independent of how experienced we are, what role we have. But even more so if you find yourself in a position of leadership or coaching or something similar, it's really important to approach other people's opinions with curiosity rather than judgment. So when someone brings up an idea that you think is crazy, instead of just following that gut reaction and say, oh no, that's a horrible idea. Instead, ask, why are you thinking this? Like, could you walk me through your thought process so that I can understand where this is coming from? Because to unleash that creativity that's flowing outside of the box, we need curiosity and an open mind inside of that box, and allow mistakes, allow alternative ideas. Okay, so assuming that all of you are in a safe space, and I truly hope that that's the case, then still we need to have techniques that can basically enable that out of the box or more creative type of thinking. And one of the most powerful techniques that I have found in my experience is actually collaboration. Now, I'm not only referring to collaboration within a team, like maybe pairing sessions or things like that, but to truly trigger that out of the box thinking, we need people with completely different perspectives who think differently than us, which means that maybe they had a different education, which means that maybe they have a different job, that they may be from a different department and are executing a different profession than we are. And you might ask yourself, yeah, but that doesn't work. I mean, we need technical knowledge to be able to solve the problems that we face. But even then, how about including the ops people that will end up supporting this in production? Or maybe the graphic designer that's kept on Figma Island, right? The newest member on the team, the intern that we just handed the stuff that even though if they screw up, it's gonna be fine, right? All of those people, they think differently than us. They're at different stages in the box and they have different perspectives. They will have different ideas. But again, that's why it's important for them to feel safe, because if they don't feel safe, they're not going to contribute. So they need to be enabled. They need to be welcomed, empowered, right? So that they can also contribute and share those ideas with us. And then there are techniques that we can use that can help. Brainstorming, brainwriting, mind mapping, reverse brainstorming, and there are plenty more, right? Now, these are just techniques that can help to get all of those ideas flowing, because it's really important to understand how the brain works, right? It works by association, connecting things based on our personal experiences, based on how we've been taught certain things, based on in which context we have learned certain things, and how good our experiences were or how bad they were. But the reality is that when you have an idea, you don't just have a single idea. Instead, what's happening is that you have multiple connected ideas, but they're still hidden away in the unconscious mind. And what these techniques can basically help us do is surface those ideas from the subconscious to the conscious mind. That is really the goal. And it's also important to try different methods, because different methods are going to work with different groups of people as well. And I know this is a beautiful stock photo. Looks super serene. Everyone is happy, collaborating, brainstorming. But the reality of this process is that it's a lot more messy and it's very chaotic, because what you will find is that everyone is sort of jumping from idea to idea, and sometimes we completely diverge from the problem that we were trying to solve in the beginning. And we're like, wait, how did we get here? That's again because of how the brain works, and then people sort of follow each other and we end up somewhere completely different, right? It's important to trust that process. That's how it's supposed to be, because otherwise those ideas don't flow as much, right? But it's also important to then manage that chaos a little bit. For example, by time boxing these meetings, or by having maybe someone facilitate these meetings, so that when you're tasked to solve a problem about an elevator and you're talking about a car, well, maybe someone could say, I think you may have diverged. I think you may have wandered too far. And then basically bring the group back to focus on the problem. Now, by applying these techniques, you will get a range of possible solutions. But then you still need to choose. Now we have options, right? And now we basically need to choose, and that's a very difficult exercise, especially because there's another challenge that we're then facing: our biases. Now, I always find it kind of interesting to see that whenever I read about biases, they're portrayed as a bad thing. And the thing is, yes, they can have negative effects, but biases themselves aren't a bad thing. It's actually a feature of the brain. It's not a bug, right? Because a bias is basically the brain's mechanism to save you brain cycles and to enable you to make swift decisions when you have to. You can sort of think of it like a performance optimization that is designed to help you deal with all of the massive amounts of information that we are being exposed to on a daily basis. But the reality is that when we make decisions in our context of building applications, of building our systems and helping our customers solve their business problems, we don't need all those performance optimizations. We can usually take some time to think about the problem we're presented with, to think about what we want to do, right? And that's why it's important to also fight those biases. Now, it's important to do so because all of our biases are based on prior learnings and prior experiences. But every context is different. And you could have had a very negative experience with one set of tooling, for example, but it may be a really good fit within your current context. And you don't want that negative bias affecting the decisions that you make in a different context. Now, if you look up biases, there's over like 100 or so documented. what I'm going to do is share the sort of top 3 that I've seen affect our thought process in our line of work most. And I'm going to do that with another story from one of the projects that I worked on. Now, at some point, I remember being in a project, and we were in a team who were kind of struggling to make progress because we were working on this application that was a beautiful ball of mud, and that was really hurting our velocity. Everything was just slow, it was overly complex, and yeah, things weren't great. And everything started once we started having a lot of turnover in the team. There's a bunch of people that left around the same time period, and we were actually able to hire new people fairly quickly. But the thing is that they then came in, they introduced all of these new coding styles and new frameworks, and then the code complexity just skyrocketed. And that is what was slowing us down. Now, what just happened in this story that I told you is what is called false causality. Because I just called out multiple events in a sequence as evidence that each event caused the next. There was a lot of turnover, new people joined, they introduced new frameworks, they increased the complexity, and now we are slow. So there's basically an assumption that all of these events led to each other without considering other factors. Was it the changing team that introduced the complexity? Or maybe the complexity was already there, but the previous team was somehow able to manage that better because they had a lot of knowledge keeping it together. Those new folks, did they have access to documentation, to domain experts to understand how the software works, how the domain works? Did you have any documented guidelines to help understand what style should we use and what frameworks are being used and why are they being used? Was there a good onboarding process? Any pairing sessions, PR reviews to check what is being changed and to give feedback at those points in times? Basically, if we don't consider all of those factors more widely, false causality is at play. Now, at that point, we're like, okay, we have this big ball of mud and we need to solve this. So we sat together and brainstormed. And there were like some discussions going on amongst the team members, but at some point, the architect stood up and said, I have a lot of experience with projects like this. I've been here for a couple of months and, I've been observing the friction that's occurring. I've been listening to all of the problems that are happening. And in my opinion, the only way forward is a full rewrite. And now I really believe that we can do it because we have all of the right knowledge. We have a newly built team now, so we can do so successfully. And what's at play here is authority bias, right? Also known as the hippo effect, the highest paid person's opinion. Because the thing is that when someone with authority makes a statement like that, there's an immediate bias at play. The remaining members had a hard time speaking up because there's this architect who is clearly more senior, who has a lot more responsibility, more experience, both inside, outside the project. And because of all of these reasons, everyone just naturally assumes that because of that, they must be right. And that's why it's really important for leaders to be aware of how their statements affect others and to refrain from sharing their opinions, giving everyone else a chance first to share their thoughts, to share their opinions, to share their solutions, right? And that also enables learning on both ends. It empowers everyone because as a leader, the most successful ones that I know, they usually speak last because that is the way that they are learning from others. And that is the way that they are teaching others as well. So that's also an important one to be aware of. But hey, we were going to do a rewrite. So our team went to management and they asked us to back up our claims because they were like, hey, we spent a lot of money on this. You have to really bring us some proof that rewriting this system is going to be the right way forward. Now, at that point, the senior members of the team went back and started to look for data supporting that stance, right? And they came up with a wide range of sort of possibilities. They came up with many articles that proved how other companies had been so successful with the rewrites and how they were now able to sort of cater to that rapidly evolving market and all of that. And yeah, that way we were able to convince management to do the rewrite. But what's at play here is confirmation bias. Because instead of approaching this with a sort of critical eye, our team blindly went back looking for data that supported exactly what it was that we wanted to do, fully assuming that all of those success stories, yeah, they're going to apply to us. But we basically failed to question, why was a rewrite the right call for all of these organizations that we listed here? And is our context the same? Do they have the same financial means as we do? Is it the same team size? Do they have a stable team? Do we? Do they have a stable domain? And do we, right? Why did they rewrite? Is that even listed in the data? What challenges did they face? Now, the biggest problem is that every one of us was convinced at that point that the rewrite was the way to go. And it became really, really hard to challenge that belief. And that is something that doesn't happen on purpose, right? People don't have bad intentions, generally speaking. But the thing is that our brain makes it really hard to detect information that goes against our beliefs. And it's more like in the opposite, right? It makes it incredibly easy to detect information that further reinforces our existing beliefs. And that's why, again, it's important to really slow down, think harder, and also purposefully seek out opposing evidence. Seek out people who disagree with you and try to figure out, okay, what are the gaps in this thinking, even though it's really uncomfortable? Now, there's one word that came up for the people who were listening closely. It may have stood out, and that word is assumption. Because an assumption is basically a statement that we believe to be true to the point that we take it for granted. There's no need to even spell it out. I mean, it's so obvious, right? But that's where the dangers lie, because those assumptions could basically present gaps in our thought process. This is exactly where we want to place the breakpoints, right? And inspect the assumptions to check, is this really true? Like, what I thought that would be there, is that actually there? And that's again why we need to slow down. And instead of assuming, we need to validate those assumptions that we make and ask ourselves, wait a second, why do I think that? And based on what data do I think that this is true? Is there someone that I could maybe validate this with? And by asking these questions on a regular basis, we could be finding the biases that are driving those sort of fast and possibly faulty thinking, right? But the thing is, again, like, all these biases, they're happening on the subconscious level. It's not something that we consciously do. So how do you stop it from happening? And I have to say that this is the hardest thing. I find myself still working on it every time, even though I've been doing it for years at this point. But it becomes easier with practice and with time. You start to recognize more easily the assumptions that you make. And there are a couple of techniques that can help. And the first one is going to come as a big surprise. I already know that. I wish I could see all of your faces right now, but it's okay. Now, I can see Rafael. Is it Rafael? I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Now, the first technique that comes to mind is basically mindfulness. And whoever is thinking, oh my God, really? Seriously? That's where you're going with this? It's okay. Give me a little bit of time. Because I usually find that within us, let's say, group of engineers, there are a lot of people that really, really enjoy building Lego, right? You can comment in the chat if you really enjoy building Lego. But one of the things that people don't usually realize is that building Lego is a mindful exercise. And I have proof for you, because this is a screenshot from the Lego website. They even have like a full page dedicated to mindfulness. And they even helped co-author a book on the topic. I'm not making this up, okay? Building Lego, mindful. Even brushing your teeth can be a mindful exercise. Now you may be asking yourself, yeah, okay, mindfulness might be, Lego could be a way to be mindful, fine. But what does that have to do with identifying biases? And I understand that reaction because we know mindfulness as a technique to cope with stress, anxiety, depression, and things like that. But all of these activities, right, that we could be doing, like box breathing or stretching, walking, yoga, Lego, whatever it is that you're doing, those allow us to be mindful. And that means nothing more than being fully present in the moment. And when we are present in the moment, we have an ability to basically observe our thoughts as they are racing through our mind without necessarily engaging with them. You can basically think of it as the ability to listen to yourself, to turn your focus inward and gain insights about what is happening inside your mind. It allows you to become self-aware and start to see the shortcuts that your brain is taking. And that also means that at those points, you can ask yourself, when a thought surfaces, say, oh, that's an interesting thought. Where did that come from? Why do I think that? So I would say if you're already practicing mindfulness in any shape or form, give it a try, see if it works. If you're not and you're like, mindfulness is a fad, maybe I've made you a little bit more curious, but if you're still resisting, no worries, I have other options, okay? And the next option is basically inviting a devil's advocate. Now, you may immediately be thinking of someone that you know is like a natural devil's advocate. And usually those people are perceived to be at least somewhat annoying because they keep asking all of these difficult questions all the time. But what I really believe is that there is value in assigning a devil's advocate within any team or any working group, and to start rotating that responsibility of acting as a devil's advocate. Why? Because that means that we don't depend on individuals to be these annoying eternal critics, but more importantly, because everyone can start to observe everyone's thought process. Because when I say devil's advocate, what I understand under that is basically having someone in the team that is then saying, okay, I'm not going to be contributing necessarily to solving the problem. What I'm going to be doing is observing the group's thought process and catching some of that groupthink that is happening, trying to catch some of those assumptions that are being made so that I can ask, hey, wait, why do you think this? And that can help surface those assumptions, right? And then because you assign someone, you can rotate it, that role, and then everyone gets better at this bit by bit as well. And then I have a final technique to share with you, and that is a wider request for feedback. Now, the idea with this technique is to basically ask feedback from people who were not involved in the decision-making process at all. People who really have like the blank mind, right? It's a blank paper. They have an outside perspective. They are not affected by groupthink. They have not been going through this process. And because they're completely detached from it, they can more easily catch biases and flaws that are happening in these decision-making processes and in these thought processes. So you may be thinking, yeah, but it's kind of crazy to schedule a meeting with 10 people just to catch biases, right? And I agree. And that's why I truly believe that it's important to write these things down so that we have it in a durable format. It can be just a simple document, or you can use a structured template like an ADR, an architecture decision record, but you can even use that for non-technical decisions as well. And having a document like that allows you to basically scale that feedback process, because now you can send it to 20 people and you can even make use of a deadline. You don't need 20 people to approve, but maybe 3, 4, 5 is enough to basically have some kind of a validation of someone with an outside perspective. Now, it takes time, right, to write all of these things down. But in the end, I've seen it to be a lot more efficient than people initially think, than I initially thought. Because actually, I read somewhere that people can read 2 to 3 times faster than they can listen. And not only that, but if you have these decisions sort of written down in a digital format, right, they can also be evolved, they can be versioned, They can be reviewed, you can search them, you can refer to them. And again, it will bring that clarity to the entire group's thinking, right? Because the entire group needs to sort of align on what is written down there. I find a lot of value in this process, and I have another talk that goes into how to build RFCs, but that's a whole other story. It'll take me another hour. But yeah, we're nearing the end of the talk. So what I would like to do is give you a couple of things to take away with you. And the first one is slowing down. And I find this one myself genuinely scary because we are in a fast-moving industry. And we tend to be in environments where we're constantly being asked to speed up, where quick results are encouraged and they're applauded. But if you start to observe how much time and money that we lose because we move way too quickly without sufficiently understanding what it is that we're trying to do, then you start to see how much there is to gain from slowing down and then hitting the ground running after you've taken some time to really understand how to approach a thing. Second of all, writing things down, right? And I know this sounds boring to a lot of people. Oh, I just would like to be coding, or I would just like to be doing something else. And this is the boring part. But there's so much value in writing down not only the problem you're trying to solve, but all of the solutions that you considered, which assumptions that you made along the way, right? The risks that you identified, and then why you chose the eventual solution that was also implemented. I have found this to be incredibly valuable down the road, especially when we make mistakes, because then we're able to go back to a document and understand in what frame of mind we were thinking back then. What were the assumptions that we were making? What was our context back then? And that usually provides a lot of insight, not only how to improve our decision making, but also to be able to say, okay, given the things that we knew at the time, we couldn't really have avoided the situation, or we could have, and then we can learn from that. And finally, to work collaboratively, to create an environment where you welcome different opinions, right? Where you involve people who think very differently than yourself, no matter how uncomfortable that can be. To not judge, but rather be curious when others think differently than you, when they come up with options that you think are a bad idea or that you wouldn't have thought of or that don't make sense to you. It's important to also nurture and protect that feeling of safety, right? So that we can keep that collaboration going. And that will allow us to start learning from each other. Because I've only started to do this in the last couple of years, but I don't think I've learned as much in those last years than I did previously. It gives you so many different perspectives that it completely changes the way that you think in a good way. Okay, and that brings me to the end. Now, I have some final thoughts to share in the sense that I feel that I sometimes feel that we may have entered a new age, right? With all of this ChatGPT and Copilot craziness going on. And you can't turn around without some AI chat talking to you, whether it's Copilot in your IDE or it's in your browser or on your phone. It's everywhere, right? And these tools can generate code more quickly than we are able to formulate the question. And, they're pretty powerful now, although they can't really do anything without us. But these tools are just in their infancy. So who's to say whether in 5, 10, 20 years from now, code might actually become a commodity? But I really believe that that only adds more importance to our ability to debug our thinking, to think critically so that we can understand that generated code, so that we can understand the outputs that these tools are proposing us, so that we can make well-balanced decisions on whether to use that or not. Already today, if you look at the global job market, right, there are 3 top skills that they're asking everywhere: complex problem solving, creativity, and critical thinking. And these are inherently human tasks, right? At least for now. And they will only become more and more important. So whenever you find yourself learning from others, reading articles and reading blog posts or going to conferences or whatever it is, it's important that we fill our toolboxes with all of these different things that we could do. But it's even more important that when we go back to our work and we can incorporate those tools and those techniques and those practices, that we debug our thinking so that we reach for the right tool for the right job. And that brings me to the end. Now, as always, I didn't make all of this stuff up, right? So I have additional resources with lots of reading materials, with books and articles, and I've really been applying this day to day on my work. But if you want to read more, there are actual, psychologists and experts in critical thinking that have written books on this if you want to learn more. And I'm really looking forward to all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoy it, even though I was listening for that for the second time. I have already
Thanks.
some
You went
notes.
through the pain.
Yeah, no pain, no gain, I heard. I went
That's what they
outside of my
say.
box again. Okay, I have my notes and some questions, but maybe does anyone from the rest of the audience have some questions? We had a lot of comments during your talk on the chat. You can even
I'm
try to
scrolling.
scroll. Yeah, but so any questions, you can send it on the chat or ask via voice. Okay, so let me try to go through the comments that triggered some discussion. Of course, the WCF and WTF, etc.
Of course.
Young
Classic.
Scott, young Scott Hanselman, etc.
Yes.
Uh,
Now, by the way, these were actual books I read. Like I actually went back to the old backlog and I was like, what was I reading back then? And
yeah,
I tried to find the pictures.
yeah. At some point, I was psycho fan of the CLR via C#. I'm not sure if I'm proud of that, but so
Same.
yeah. So there was a comment from Martin. So it was at the part when you were talking about slowing down and trying to make notes. So Martin commented that it's like in health, you should first make a proper diagnosis before starting any treatment, right? You don't want to treat a patient for something they don't have and make the condition worse. So do you agree with this comment?
Strongly, yes. And unfortunately, that happens as well, right?
Yeah.
But hopefully they do spend some time thinking about the problem and the symptoms and what may be going on. Yeah, that's a really, really good anecdote or analogy. I like that.
So I have a follow-up question. So do you think or do you see that there are some like quick wins or easy practices? Like for instance, as I know, in the medical industry, it was a surprisingly helpful invention that you should wash your hands before making the surgery, and that saved like thousands of lives. So do you think that we have something like that in our industry, or like in terms of, thinking, etc.? Do you see some like a mental hygiene that you would recommend?
Yeah, I would say writing the problem down. That would be my washing the hands. Because, like I said, I meant it when I said that I usually start with, I'm going to quickly write this down 5 minutes. And then by going through that exercise, you start to question yourself 1,000 different ways. And you usually come up with more questions because it forces you to think in terms of the problem. And that is generally really hard because, at least the way I've been educated and how I see everyone else around me that have been educated as engineers, is we are not taught to do this, right? So it becomes an active exercise of learning this. And that's why I find it so important, even as an engineer, to talk about these meta topics, because I really believe that it can make us better at doing our work. Even though, it may mean that you know one framework less. Who cares?
Yeah.
But that's my opinion.
Yeah, I fully agree. Like, for me, one of the biggest challenges that I had when working in my teams was that when the team was coming with some proposal for a design, then when I was asking, okay, so what other option did you thought about? Then usually the answer was like, isn't this solution sufficient? And my answer was, you tell me, I don't know. And most of the time, people are not even trying to come up with such ideas that maybe they are wrong, but if they do, as you said, write it down, and even just for an exercise, try to see if there is better option, then I agree, then we could have much better solutions.
Yeah, one of the things I've also tried a couple of times that is also like a super interesting exercise is that sometimes, we are talking to a customer, to a stakeholder, whatever, with a couple of people, maybe 2, 3 people. And as part of sort of thinking through all of these processes, there was a while when we said, okay, 2 different people are going to come up with a problem statement. And that is incredibly different. Like the results of that, everyone, like 2 people spend 15 minutes and come up with a problem statement, and that is like wildly different, which I think shows that sort of friction that is also happening.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And there was also the some comments around the biases and the power relationship. So what I noticed and what I tried a few times in my workshops was to come, and you mentioned that anti-requirements, but in my case, it's a bit modified. So like, let's come up with the worst ideas that you can have, like totally the worst. And do you think, because what I notice is that then it helps people that maybe don't feel enough comfortable because they know that, well, this has to be the worst, so I can be more creative. What are your thoughts about such
Yeah,
approach?
that was actually one of the techniques that was on one of the slides where I had reverse brainstorming, right? I didn't go over each individual technique, but that is exactly what reverse brainstorming is that you're going to come up with all of the solutions that you think won't work, and then you have to prove why they're not going to work.
Yes.
And that's actually also an exercise to break through your biases, because sometimes you will find a solution that you say like, actually, this might actually work, even though I thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah.
But
Usually,
yeah,
I'm asking the other people to try to defend this the worst idea, and then it's like, then it makes sense, right?
exactly. Yeah. So you're also doing the devil's advocate type of thing then.
Yeah, that's in my nature. Unfortunately, I'm a troublemaker. But Martin commented that he loved it and he gets the Doctor House vibes.
And an adult fan of Lego. I'm one too, by the way.
I'm also, but together with my daughter.
Well, yeah,
I saw.
that's the excuse, Oscar. That's the excuse. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's like if you're going to the shop and it's like you're coming and, well, I will take this set of Lego box, and then if the shopkeeper tells, yeah, great, your daughter will love it, you say that, then give me 2. uh, so I have another question because I don't see any more coming at the moment on the chat. So do you think that we can learn more from the mistakes or from successes? Like, because postmortems are quite fashionable in our industry to analyze them, but
Not
what are your
nearly
thoughts?
sufficiently fashionable, I think, but
Yeah, not enough, but at
not enough.
least
Yeah.
many companies are, I mean, those major are producing some of that.
Well,
what are your
that's one
thoughts?
of the reasons that I really believe in documenting the decisions, right? Because one of the things that I believe is we can learn, it's like the obvious thing. We can learn from our mistakes, clearly, but we can also learn from our successes. And I think, if something succeeds, there's always part luck involved, right? Like situational circumstances that lead us towards success. But I think when you have all of these things documented, you can also go back and try to understand, why did these things work in that context? What was different? Like from a situation in which we failed making a decision. And I think doing that comparison can also really be insightful, but that also is sort of predicated on the fact that you would be writing all of these things down, because otherwise that's another thing, is people always think, oh yeah, but I remember like that at that point. We don't. Like,
Yeah.
we tell ourselves we remember, but we forget all of those details that are basically influencing us in the moment to make one decision versus the other. So I think we need to be conscious of that. And that's why I really believe in writing it down. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I'm writing these things down and I'll be like, oh, I hate this. But I have never gone through the exercise and afterwards looked back at it and thought to myself, that was a waste of time. That has never happened. Even though I may not have enjoyed it while I was doing it, I've always found it valuable afterwards.
Yeah, I fully agree. And for instance, the reason why I was asking is not only in programming, but I always make I was always trying to learn by mistakes, but then you can fail 1,000 times and you can still don't learn how to succeed if you never seen how to do it right. If you only
Yeah,
see how to do it wrong. So yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Thank you, thank you.
agreed.
Uh, um, does anyone have a question via voice or via chat? Feel free to interrupt me. No. Then I have. I think that I will use a few more minutes if you don't mind. So, do you have some heuristics about how to find if something is in the problem space or solution space? I know that this is not so easy to say, and even in our community like DDD, there were a lot of discussions like that. But do you have some, like, even small practical heuristics to, or just sanity check to know whether we are more to focus on solution instead of the problem?
My main sanity check, and this is really how we work as well, at particular, is that let's say that I'm tasked with defining a problem for something, and I'm talking to someone, is that the end result is never just mine. And that's why I talked about collaboration, is because this is how we work, right? So for me, that is the sanity check, is to have someone else look at it and take it apart, because you can think things through a lot, but unless you have the ability to put it away and come back to it a week later, if you have the time to do that, that also works really well. Because sometimes just letting all of these thoughts and all of that sort of sit in your brain for a while and step away from it can also bring clarity, right? But let's say that you don't have the capacity to wait for a week and then come back to it, then I feel that including other people, that maybe, for example, one of the things that you can do is, if you have a meeting with a stakeholder, is record that meeting, or invite someone who's, if you're in a physical, in-person space, is to invite them, even if they're not contributing, they're just listening in. Because the way that we also absorb information from other people, there's just so much that goes wrong just in that. Communication is hard, right? And we understand things differently, and we pick up on different nuances of what people tell us. And I think the sanity check is really collaboration. And I really believe that.
Yeah, Yeah, I can only sign on that. All the teams that I was working that I loved the most was those that were the most diverse,
Yeah.
and I mean diversity on really not only about like gender, etc., but in general, the
Hmm.
more diverse it was always the better.
Yeah,
So
I agree. I agree. One of the most successful projects I worked on a lot earlier in my career, it's been a couple of years now, is we basically replaced the entire bank mainframe application with a .NET application. It was an effort that in total took 7 years, I think. I was there for almost 5 years. And one of the main reasons that I'm truly convinced that this worked so well is what they basically did is apart from, all of the technical architects and whatever that you want, what they did is they went to people that were, for example, I worked on mortgages. I wrote the entire code to calculate how, mortgages are being calculated and expensed and all of that. But one of the things that they did is they went to people who were selling mortgages, right, to individuals that were looking for a new challenge. They pulled them literally out of the field and put them on the IT team. That was their
mm,
full-time job, right? Is to just be a consultant. They were there the entire time. There was no, I need to book a meeting with a business expert. I could just turn around and say, hey, I have a question. And that really led to this collaboration in terms of analysis, in terms of testing, in terms of even implementation, because I had a rubber duck that was thinking very differently than me, that was really, really knew how the business worked. And I was also challenging them, right? Why
mhm.
don't you do it this way? And that collaboration was, also really one of the highlights of my career. Yeah, really, really cool project.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great. I always wanted to be in such project, like the the really vertical team. Yeah, I heard that
Yeah.
even some people are able to do some pair. I wouldn't say programming, but pair working with the like business people and developer. That sounds really
Yeah.
great.
We do this in particular too. It's one of the things that I
Mm,
really love. We get to work with people that think really differently.
mm.
That's just awesome. I like it.
Yeah, I also think that we can learn even from like less experienced people. Like
For
I
sure.
always, when I'm talking with someone, like I talk a lot with, when I'm answering some questions about even sourcing, etc., then for me it's always learning experience because when I hear the question that is in theory, someone can say naive, then for me it's always like, I never even thought that someone could think about this case, and it,
Exactly.
it's also a great learning experience. So yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so
the entire idea that experienced people can't learn from more junior people is a massive misconception.
yeah, yeah. So that was also what I meant about diversity, because it might be really various things to to think
Yeah.
of. Okay, so I think last question, unless someone will ask something else. I promise that we will get back to knitting. So is it like your mindfulness exercise?
It is one of them. But yes, it is. I I have a really chaotic brain, and I have trouble sort of shutting down, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. So even when I stop working, I'm like, oh, I should this and I should that and I should that. And sometimes just sitting down in the couch and knitting, because it's such a repetitive exercise, it allows me to turn off my brain. And in the beginning, it's sort of something that happens naturally because it's really hard to learn how to knit. But now at some point, it becomes sort of muscle
Mm-hmm.
memory. For me, it's muscle memory. And then it allows me to sort of calm down, but also to think about things in a completely different sort of mindset, right? You're a
Mm-hmm.
lot more calm, you're away from the problem, and you can look at things from a distance. It's really helped me in many different ways, also at work, but also outside of work. And I really enjoy it. I make beautiful scarves and sweaters for the kids and sweaters for myself. And yeah, that's also I like it.
Yeah.
Even though I look like a grandma sometimes with my knitting needles, I can deal with that. It's fine.
Mm. Yeah, for me it makes perfect sense. For me, I have similar exercise while playing guitar, although saying that I'm playing guitar is abuse for anyone doing that. But yeah, it's like you described. I really believe that finding something that can make your mind purely focus on the mechanical stuff, it's really like, for me, I can play for 10 or 15 minutes and then it's enough. And probably also because I'm so terrible at playing on it that I need to really focus on that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that really helps you shut down, I think. Yeah, I like that.
okay, so I won't be keeping you longer, but I can read some comments like, love it. I have to leave, but thanks for presentation. Great talk. Great talk. Really enjoy it. So I can again. Unfortunately, I need to also confirm that from my side.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, if you are Polish, then the worst thing that can happen to you is when you can only say that something was great. Like,
I need to remember that.
or if
Well, I'm
your
so
name,
sorry for your loss, Oscar.
yeah, or only the worst thing is when your neighbor is successful. Then it's the worst. But yeah, I also love it. Thank you a lot for sharing your insights with us and spending with us this hour and a half. I really appreciate that, and thank you all who joined the webinar. We had over 10 people, so yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you a lot.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.